Today, we're looking at a blue-black ink from Parker. It's Parker Quink's Blue Black. Hi, I'm Adam, and I'm an ink guy. I get inks, test them, and share the results with you. Now, there's timestamps in the description down below, so you can skip around, but if you've got the time, I'd appreciate you checking out the entire video. You can also follow me over on Instagram. And if you're new here, I do fountain pen ink reviews every single day, so I would invite you to subscribe. To make sure I have a range of experience, I do the writing samples. I then put the ink into this Parker jotter with a medium nib to write for a day and take the notes for this video. For the first writing sample, I always use Clairfontaine, Tomoe River, and Rhodia paper. There is an additional writing sample that'll happen later in the video. Now, let's look at the writing sample. I picked this ink up in sample form, and to make sure I keep my writing sample consistent, I use a Jinhao 159 with a Goulet 1.1 stub, a Jinhao X450 with a Goulet medium, and a Jinhao X750 with a Goulet extra fine. Let's take a look at the Clairfontaine. We get no bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather spread, halo sheen, but it does offer some shading. Now that's because it goes from being a normal blue to a very, very light blue and a normal again. The extra fine is a little bit darker than the stub, with no feather spread, halo sheen, and much better shading than it had in the stub. Like, look at the word over, where it gradually goes from very light to very dark. Lazy is a nice dark and then works its way very light at the Y. Fox starts very dark and then becomes a nice mid-tone and very dark on the X again. 9 seconds to dry. Now the medium is a little bit darker than the extra fine, with no feather spread, halo sheen, and still very nice shading, like the word over, very light to very dark. The, light to dark. Fox, dark to light in the middle to very dark on the end. Good qualities here. 14 seconds to dry. Now the scrubby for both show us no color variation. The scrubbies for both show us plenty of color variation. And we got plenty of color variation. I don't know why I said no color variation there. Tomoe River. No bleeding, normal Tomoe River ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather spread, halo sheen. It does offer little bits of shading, more in the point that it's super light on the beginning of the B and normal, or the K in Parker's much darker than the rest of the word, but not a whole lot else. Now the extra fine is a little bit darker than the stub, with no feather spread, halo sheen, and no real shading, but 16 seconds to dry. Medium is even darker than the extra fine, much darker than the stub, with no feather spread, halo sheen, or shade, 22 seconds to dry. The scrubby of the extra fine shows some color variation, which we really don't get in the writing. The medium shows us none, and we get none. Rhodia. No bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather spread, halo sheen, and no real shading going on. The extra fine is a little bit darker than the stub, with no feather spread, halo sheen, or shade. 11 seconds to dry. Now the medium is even darker than the extra fine, quite a bit darker than the stub, with no feather spread, halo sheen, and no real shading. Now the scrubby of the extra fine, far left to far right, shows quite a bit of color variation. The medium shows none. Although we really didn't get it in the writing, the color variation we get is much more from what nib we choose. I agree with Vita. I've learned a lot by doing multiple chromatographies. The one on the left is done the way it's supposed to be done. I put a line of ink down and immediately put it into water for 10 to 15 seconds. And you see a dark blue that pushes its way up. You then see a little line of green that moves its way across and a very bright, vivid blue at the top. The one on the right I let dry for 10 minutes before I dunk it into water. And what we see here is that darker blue purpley tone on the bottom is really staying in place in a line. It is pushing its way up some. There's a slight water separation right before we see the green and that very vivid blue. But it does make me feel that that purpley tone is really going to be a stick-around color. Resistance tests are done to see how well this ink can be expected to perform on the page and how hard it may be to clean from your pen. I let the smear dry for 3 days before testing it. Looking at the highlighter, I go straight to the GH where I start seeing a lot of blurriness, but it's not unreadable. So it would be your choice whether you wanted to risk your notes with this ink if you choose to highlight. Now, water's lifting all of the darkest tones, but really it's just moving the ink around. It's not really getting this ink off the paper. Pen Flush is doing everything that water did and not a whole lot more. It's going to take a little bit of time and a little bit of scrubbing if we can get this Pen Flush to do it. So it's just something to kind of be aware of here. Now, the 1/3 bleach solution completely obliterates it, takes it entirely off the page. That's with only 30 seconds. If you had to use that, just make sure that what you do is wash it with water immediately, and you shouldn't have too much trouble. Now, the funny thing about this ink is I did find it to be a little more resistant inside the Jinhao converters when I was cleaning those out. It was holding on there a little bit more than it did on the Sailor or the Parker converter. I test viscosity or flow with a tilt test that I'll link down below in a description or in a card. Now, for the inks I've tested, I have found an average viscosity of 2.5, with the realm of normal being from 2.1 to 2.9. Parker Quink Blue Black has a viscosity of 1.74, making this a pretty wet ink. To find my average dry times, I use my writing samples done on Clairfontaine, Tomoe River, and Rhodia paper. I average those. Now, for the inks I've tested, I have found an average dry time of 17 seconds, with the realm of normal being from 13 to 21 seconds. Parker Quink Blue Black has an average dry time of 15 seconds, so in spite of it being pretty wet, its dry time is normal. Instead of finding inks that look like Parker Quink's Blue Black, I would prefer to find an ink that complements its color on the page, and I wanted a nice dusty red, and I chose Birmingham Pen Company's Fred Rogers Cardigan Red. The second writing sample is done in a Vinta notebook, Strathmore writing paper, and Limone paper. Here we're looking at Vinta. It is the Modern Traveler notebook. Generally, not the greatest paper. We do see some bleed spots that are occurring. It does not touch the page underneath. In fact, largely, the ghosting's not too bad, and you could use the back of the paper. The 1.1 stub has no feather spread, halo sheen, no real shading going on. The extra fine is noticeably darker than the stub, with no feather spread, halo sheen, or shade. 6 seconds to dry. The medium is noticeably darker than the extra fine, with no feather spread, halo sheen, or shade, and 7 seconds to dry. So while this is an inexpensive or a lower quality paper notebook, it handles pretty well with this ink. Now, the scrubby for both show no real color variation. The extra fine shows much more on camera, but we're not seeing it in the writing. Strathmore writing paper. We have no real bleeding, no real ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather spread, halo sheen, and no shade. Now, the extra fine is noticeably darker than the stub, with no feather spread, halo sheen, or shade, and 5 seconds to dry. The medium, again, is much darker than the extra fine, with no feather spread, halo sheen, or shade, 7 seconds to dry. So we see a lot of the nib and flow are greatly affecting the color or the tone of the ink. The scrubby for both show us no color variation. We didn't expect it, and we didn't get it. Limone paper. Now, it's largely not done well with fountain pens, and it didn't do well here. Now, the stub bled quite a bit, not touching the page underneath. The extra fine has spots where you see it deep into the paper, but it does not come through. The medium has plenty of bleed spots, but again, not coming through. Now, the stub and the medium, both, you couldn't use the back of the page, I don't think so comfortably. But the extra fine, you could. So the ghosting can be under control if you use a dry, fine pen. The 1.1 stub, it has feather, it has spread, it has no halo, sheen, no shade. This is thick writing compared to before. Quite a bit thicker. Okay? And it is feathering all over the place, but this is a lower quality production paper. The extra fine has some feathering, like on the K in quick. It has some feathering on the bottom of the F in fine, in the O of over. It does spread from about an extra fine to a medium. No halo, no sheen, no shade. 7 seconds to dry. The medium, significantly darker than the extra fine. The medium has spread, has feather, a lot of feathering, a lot of tiny feathering all over. The D in dry is very feathered, the whole thing. The B in brown, very feathered. The entire of the, very feathered. And this medium looks more like a broad. No halo, sheen, shade, 10 seconds to dry. The Scrubby for both shows no color variation. We didn't expect it, and we didn't get it, and that is all that I have for the writing sample. So what do I think of Parker Quink Blue Black? It is far too blue leaning for me. In fact, it looks like a darker version of their blue ink. I don't see any black in it at all, and I don't see that coming across in it in the writing, swatches, chromatography, or anything. What pen and nib would give the best writing experience with this ink? Well, a dry fine pen puts down a very nice light blue, and a wet broad puts a much darker blue down. Now, the one you choose is completely up to you, so it's dealer choice just based on what you prefer. If you've made it this far, and according to my analytics, 50% of you aren't, and you enjoyed it, give me a thumbs up. If you are not subscribed, I would invite you to subscribe, and thanks for watching.